within 3-4 weeks from start of fermentation to finish. And I can go through my process. I can start by assuring everyone there are many, many ways to do this. And I know that because I know a bunch of mead makers that do this as well, and are making fantastic meads in a month. Jason, who you just had on, is one of them, and he does a totally different process than I do. So there's not one way to get a mead that is delicious in a short amount of time. And there's not really even. It's less about the ingredients, including the yeast, as it is just about the yeast being happy and healthy all the way through. And that kind of makes all the difference. And so what you have to figure out is, what does that mean for the yeast you're going to use? The gravity you're starting at, your ability to do temperature control and oxygen additions and nutrient additions, all that. Figuring out what combination of all those things will keep the yeast you're using the happiest that's the trick right there. And it took me a lot of experimenting to get there. But what I do is I experimented with tons of different ale and wine yeast and kind of settled on English ale yeast from White Labs, liquid yeast.
Okay.
And
that's 1388, right?
No, that's 1388
that's
is a Belgian.
Belgian, yeah.
Belgian.
I'm looking at the one.
Yeast.
Yeah, it's a bomb yeast.
That's the bomb yeast. Yeah, that's my favorite.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're looking at English ale then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the English ale yeast will tell you on the package, like White Labs will tell you, alcohol tolerance about 8%. And that's not true at all. And you'll hear people, say this online all the time. Don't trust that. But what it really means is, if you are really kind and generous to your yeast, I'll get an English ale yeast up to 12.5% every time. That's usually where it craps out for me, but it is absolutely doable. So once you know that, or I guess once I kind of realized that, it really opened up a world of, man, I could really look at any of these ale yeasts. I don't just have to look at the ones that are high alcohol tolerance. I can really select from any of these. So I started experimenting with them, and that's how I came on the English ale ones. And so using liquid yeast, you need to do a starter, and you need to ensure that you're using a healthy amount of yeast, because the amount you start with is really going to have a huge role in how your mead turns out. But you need to have enough of a healthy population starting.
Okay. Now, if can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I saw a conversation on Got Mead a few days ago where people were discussing the efficacy of a starter. And you may have seen that too. I don't know. It was on the Got Mead Facebook group. But it was about should I starter or not, and there were people on both sides of the fence. And, you were just saying a starter and enough yeast, and that was another part that came up as well. What if I have to upsize? There was somebody else who had to upsize his batch. It was a measuring screw-up. So why starter? For those that don't already know, there's people out there going, duh, we know this. But there's also people out there going, why should I?
Yeah. A starter is, first of all, just for liquid yeast. Dry yeast, you're just rehydrating. And if you have liquid yeast, the starter is really about building up the population before you pitch it. But there's a little bit more than that. It's also getting the yeast acclimated and then ensuring that you have the healthiest possible population once you pitch your yeast. Because you could just add more vials of yeast if you want more yeast and not use a starter. And you can absolutely do that, and you can do that and make great mead.
Mm-hmm.
I've found that when I use a starter, not only does it allow me to build up a population and not buy, 4 vials of White Labs yeast, which is going to cost an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
But it ensures that they're healthy, and that when you're pitching, you really have the healthiest population you can have, and the right yeast count. And it actually took me a while to figure out how to do a starter for mead, because there's not a lot out there. Bray Denard kind of has a method, and he was the first person I ever ran into that actually used a liquid starter and put nutrients in it and kind of had a process. Mine's a little different. So let's see. If I'm making 5 gallons, I will do a 2-liter starter. I'll use 2 vials of White Labs yeast, which I think is about the same as 2, smack packs of Y yeast, I think. And so 2 vials of White Labs yeast. Now, you want to make sure that the gravity is no higher than 1050. So you don't want to do your starter with the gravity you'll actually make your mead at. And that's really important, because all you're trying to do here is build up the population, and you want them to have the easiest way and happiest way to do that. No stress at all. So it's kind of a more watered down mixture, but I do it at like 1045, I think is the gravity for my starters, and I'll add a little bit of Ferment O and some Go Firm in the starter itself. And I know Go Firm's supposed to be for dry yeast, but I just found that it helps, at this point. So throw that in, and I'll put it on a stir plate and let it sit for a day or two. And then pour out some of the must, and keep the yeast cake at the bottom, and then dump that in when I'm ready to go. So that's the starter, and then from there, really the way to look at it to get delicious mead in a short amount of time is just remember, it's not about the destination, it's all about the journey. So it doesn't matter that you can get yeast from point A to point B. It's all in how they get there. And the littlest things could make a difference in having a great mead at a month and needing to age it a few months, needing to age it a year. So the things that have worked for me that I've found are additions of pure oxygen. So I'll do right when I make the must and throw in the yeast, I'll do 90 seconds of pure oxygen. And yeast need that oxygen when they're starting out, and I let them have it. So I found that to be critical. And then temp control, and I think a lot of people have heard this over and over, but temp control is, to me, the single biggest factor in making good mead in a short amount of time. So I'll ferment at 60 degrees ambient in my chest freezer, which means that mead is about at 62 to 63, and I won't let it get up past that until maybe the last few days, and then bump it up to like 64, 65. So that, to me, I mean, even when I was making mead at 66 degrees to 67, even that makes a huge difference. So if you don't have a way to do temp control, just find a way. That's all I could say. It pays out. You'll be happy you did. and then I do kind of a different version of Sergio's Tosna. I do use all ferment O, but I add the first dose in the must, right when I pitch the yeast. And I do that because when you're using liquid yeast, you're not rehydrating, so you're not giving them all those nutrients in the beginning. At least this is my theory. I kind of wish more people were doing it this way to tell me if I'm right or wrong. But I feel that because you're not rehydrating them, you're just dumping them right in. They need something to get started, and so I add the first dose right when I pitch the yeast, and then kind of follow his thing from there. 3 more additions.
Yeah, I've always added a dose of nutrients at the very beginning as well. Always.
Yeah, I start mine with, and I don't know if this, I think partly this was Pete beating me over the head with it, and partly because I used to bake. Even with dry yeast, I basically rehydrate it, but I basically make a small starter. I'll put in nutrients and some honey water and, give it everything it needs to get a good start going, and then when it's looking happy, then it goes into the main must.
Okay, yeah.
So I haven't done a lot with the liquid yeast. Mostly I seem to always gravitate to the dry ones, but now I've got some 1388 in my fridge. I got to make a bomb, so it's sitting there looking at me.
It's very forgiving.
It's looking at me.
Yeah, and I've found the English ale to be my favorite for all the yeasts I've ever tried, but there are so many ways to make a great mead that use wine yeast, use different ale yeast. So the yeast selection, I'm tempted to say, well, because I use an ale yeast, it helps that it doesn't need any aging. But then again, there's a lot of mead makers out there that use wine yeast, and they make great mead in 3 to 4 weeks. So, I'm not sure that the yeast selection really matters as much as how you treat it.
Yeah, that's one thing I found, that if I take care of my meads, they generally turn out well. If I don't, they don't.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if we've asked you, maybe I missed it, do you use any particular kind of honey, or do you alternate, different meads, different honeys? Or are you married to one or another?
My go-tos are orange blossom and buckwheat down here, and one, I like the flavor profiles of them. I think orange blossom lets me do really light fruity stuff, and the buckwheat allows me to do really complex coffee meads, really great traditional chocolate meads. But it's also a great expression of where I live. So orange blossom is absolutely Southern California, and then buckwheat is a great expression of the desert. And the sage and buckwheat blossom you can get down here make some amazing meads, and it's just a great way to say this is really what San Diego honey is all about, and this is what it can be. And that's kind of what makes mead fun. Every area has different honeys they're known for. So we are buckwheat, and if people on the East Coast that haven't had Western buckwheat are listening thinking that's crazy.
It's totally different. I've had both. It is totally different.
Yeah, isn't it? It's like night and day. There's a little, we have a little bit of Barney-ness and a little bit of, horse blanket type thing going on in ours, but it's like subtle. It just gives it kind of a unique complexity. It's much more like molasses and dark caramel and toffee kind of flavors. And I've had Eastern buckwheat, and I think that's awesome too. The stuff Jason Phelps can do with Eastern buckwheat, I've been blown away by.
Oh yeah,
but it is different.
There's several